Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was here the first time in '96 on one of my first conferences at Kadir University, which I have in fond memories. Was the best conference I ever attended. Uh, so whenever I can come back to Istanbul, I very much look forward to it. Last time I was here was 2009, so it's about time to come back. So what I should also say, I am an economist by training. My chair is called Psychology of Economic Decision Making, which pretty much describes a little bit what my influences are. I'm an economist. I like psychology. I believe in interdisciplinarity, but interdisciplinarity is difficult. But so what you will see today is my approach to interdisciplinarity that I will introduce during this talk. And obviously we have also started to collaborate here. So Ono-chan and others in the room, Ensar and Ilaida, we have Maruk, Burak, we have joint papers because we have joint interests centered around cooperation. So what I will do today, however, is I present a paper and relate a couple of papers, but actually mostly one paper, which is entitled Cooperating with Rules, which is with my colleague Robin Cubitt and my current PhD student Piers Gately. And this was all funded by the European Research Council. So cooperation is, of course, what we study here, and we have already got a little introduction by Ono-chan about this. That's what I'm trying to do today is what do we mean by cooperation here? I mean, the thing that interests us is that we focus on. There are other aspects to this is how do people decide on self-interest? Myself, material, some sort of tangible self-interest, yeah, and collective benefit, what's good for the group as a whole, are in conflict. Excuse me. So that's my take on it. So the collective benefit is to do recycling. My self-interest is maybe to throw my litter away wherever it suits me because it's costly to carry the litter around with me. Yeah, so better dispose of it. But this is the collectively responsible way of doing it. Self-interest might suggest this. So that's a generic problem. So cooperation occurs in the small scale. Queuing is a small scale cooperation problem if you want. Yeah. Why is it a cooperation problem? Because the collective benefit is to have orderly queues because then everybody gets to their goal fastest. But my self-interest is maybe to push forward and to jump the queue. Yeah. Cooperation at the workplace or during COVID to wear masks, yeah, to prevent the spread of the virus, or the biggest cooperation problems of all, global warming. Yeah, so what we can, one perspective that I have on this is that this is cooperating is intricately connected to rule following. And the reason for this is that I think rules are often a very practical way of organizing cooperation and collective action. So take of this example here, that you can see in parks. You have a dog, and the dog obviously has some desires. And but if all dogs do what they desire to do, then the park becomes pretty unpleasant and smelly and so on. So that's the collective cooperation problem here. And here is a rule. This is a rule. Take your dog at the leash, and the rule says don't let them do their business wherever they want. Yeah. So what are this signifies also what I mean by rules. Rules are demands of doing something, keep your dog at the leash, or don't do something. Don't let the dog do what he wants. Yeah. Another rule, yeah, in a quiet coach, I took this picture in a quiet coach in a Swiss train. And the rule again is, it's obvious, keep quiet. It says quiet code, so everybody can infer what the rule is from here. Yeah, this is a picture I took in a church. So this is a public, the train coach is a public space. Everybody benefits in the quiet coach from a quiet train, but I might want to do that phone call. So that's the self-interest. I want to listen to my music or talk to or whatever. What I'm not supposed to do in a quiet coach. That's why coaches are here for. In a church, you have to respect the rules of a church. Yeah, that means also not taking phone call, not talking and so on, not wearing improper dress and stuff. Yeah, this is all rules meant to govern the collective space of a church in this case. Yeah, this is rules that you probably remember from the COVID times when the government issued rules what you're supposed to do. And again, here the idea is, self-interest might tempt me to ignore those rules. Collective interest is to obey them to prevent the spread of the virus. So, and the problem extends, of course, to many different levels. Yeah, we can start at the top. Yeah, rules sustain large-scale cooperation. What's the biggest large-scale cooperation problem? Keeping peace in the world. Yeah. And that's what the rules-based international order set up after the World War II was supposed to do. It's a rule, yeah. And as we now experience, it's about to unravel, or if it's not has already unraveled, but it's a rule. Countries use, by and large, with exceptions, follow those rules, yeah. The EU or NATO are rules-based systems, yeah, that work if people follow those rules that are needed to sustain something like the EU or sustain something like NATO, might unravel if these rules are broken. Yeah. Constitutions, yeah, are a rule system that are designed to organize the entire basic fundamental rules of interaction in a society. And constitutions come in written and unwritten form, so it doesn't matter for that. Yeah, there are rules that societies or countries have obeyed until recently, and now we observe what's happening when rules are being broken on a daily basis. Yeah. So obviously laws and rules of law, the rule of law in general, are something that provide a public good of clear expectations of what you can expect is going to happen to you, if you break rules or not. Democracy is a rules-based system that enables, provides a public good of that all citizens have equal voice, that some people want to undermine. What I already mentioned is rules governing public spaces, rules governing organizations, and so on. So what this means is, from the very top, keeping peace in the world, down to managing churches, there are rules, and we are supposed to follow them, and obviously we might have incentives to break those rules. So what are rules? As I said before, rules are typically statements of do something or don't do something else. Yeah? And as the philosopher Joseph Heath has called them deontic constraints. So they are, you ought to do this. It's a normative request, and it's a constraint in the sense that you're supposed to follow it. Yeah. But the issue here is you might have incentives to break those rules from a self-interest point of view because you think it binds you too much and you lose something because you obey the rule. If I pick up my phone to do the phone call, I lose that benefit. So if I obey the rule, I don't do my phone call. Yeah? And this is true for all of these examples. If you break the rule, you might gain something. You might acquire another country. Yeah. So if you say, okay, if I don't obey the rules of the rules-based order, I can get Ukraine or I can get Greenland. So that's the type of selfish benefits you have if you break the rules. Yeah. So this selfish incentives always exist, and so therefore, and rules are the means to organize cooperation in society. Therefore, rule following and cooperation are intimately linked, in my view. Yeah, and therefore, studying rule following is also a means of studying cooperation. What I do today now is I will first introduce you to rules and rule following without cooperation, explicitly, then I combine these things. Yeah, so, and okay, when we do this, I'm obviously, you quickly realize that studying rule following is not just based on pure incentives. There are other things happening. And what I try to do is, here is to introduce a framework that captures what we have learned across the social sciences, human behavioral sciences over the last decades. And I start at home, so to speak, as an economist. So from an econ perspective, when I was a student, I was told everything has to be explained in terms of self-interest. Yeah. So, I was a student 30 years, more than 30, shocking to say almost 40 years ago. So, and when I was at university, the only game in town was explaining cooperation or anything you happen that looks pro-social in terms of self-interest of the actors that do it. Yeah. So that's what's called extrinsic incentives. And from Gary Becker, a famous economist and Nobel laureate, he said, we explain crime and rule following and all that stuff as a function of the incentives. If the expected costs of breaking the rule exceed the expected benefits of breaking the rule, I obey the rule, and otherwise I don't. Yeah? So it's a cost-benefit analysis that determines whether I follow the rule or not. And of course, there's evidence for this, and lots of evidence is consistent with this type of reasoning. Yeah, where do these incentives come from? They might come from the punishment that I receive. If I break a law, or if I steal, or if I get caught, or if I break any rule, I follow the rule because I expect to be punished. That's the sole reason for rule following here, is expected costs of breaking the rule. If they exceed the benefits of breaking the rule, I follow it, and otherwise I break it. So the problem with that perspective is obviously it's a little bit narrow-minded, because it reduces everything. That's what I meant before with the self-interest hypothesis. Self-interest says it's exactly that. You require for stable rule following stable expected punishment that exceeds the benefits from breaking the rule. Yeah? Then we can explain cooperation. But then, of course, people realize that there's other things happening. People donate, they volunteer, they do charitable things and this and that, and they help each other when apparently these things cannot matter. So be the only game in town. So economists argued, many people had argued, that social preferences matter. That means people consider what happens to other people. So when I was a student, these experimental games came up, and I was part of this research then to establish the existence of something like social preferences, given that everybody believed the first thing. Yeah, so then we designed experiments of the sorts that you will see today, that you all know, that public goods games and trust game, the ultimatum game, the dictator game, and such things, which were designed with the first perspective in mind. Yeah? So everything's extrinsic incentives. So we call the extrinsic incentives constant. There can be, there's anonymous, there is money involved, you can, and still people share in the dictator game, they reject ultimatum game, they cooperate in one-shot games, they punish and all that stuff. So that established existence of social preferences. Yeah? People do seem to consider externalities, consequences for other people in their decision-making to some extent. Yeah? To what extent is an ongoing research effort that I could give another set of lectures about, actually. So, and what this suggested is that cost and benefit valuations include consequences for others. So, but then there is something that is left out of this picture that social psychologists and sociologists said is really crucial, and this is why the economic approach that's still individual-centered. Yeah, these are all individualistic motives, consequences for me, and to some extent I consider in the consequences for me also the consequences for other people. But there's another motive that, as I said, social psychologists and sociologists pointed out, and this is do what other people do. Yeah. I do something because others are doing it. Yeah? Or because I think this is what I'm supposed to do. That's the norm. And one should do something ought, an ought component. And I try to match those things. Yeah? I conform with those expectations. So that's something that maybe sociologists that I read at the time, at least, they seem to emphasize that a lot as something that economists had no clue about. And they were right about it. Yeah? Economists didn't have a clue because the model of economics is very individualistic. This takes into account that this is an additional motivation that exceeds those other motivations. That exists in addition maybe to these other motives, that I do something because of incentives, or I do something because of social preferences. I do it because other people do it. Yeah? So this type of conformism, that obviously was known in psychology for a long time, much longer than economists took it seriously, because they didn't have the analytic framework to think about it much. Yeah? So nowadays this is called descriptive beliefs. Yeah? So, or normative beliefs, sometimes also called injunctive beliefs, where I think I do something because other people do it. That's what descriptive beliefs means. I observe certain behavior. Everybody seems to be wearing a mask here, so I'm wearing a mask. Yeah? Nobody seems to be wearing a mask. I don't want to wear a mask. I don't wear a mask. Yeah? The incentive structure hasn't changed. Yeah? The social consequences for other people hasn't changed, but this is an additional motivation. Do what other people do. Yeah? And then there is something else that philosophers and legal theorists seem to stress a lot. And then they said, now people also, or for rule-based systems to work, you need to follow the rule even if nobody else is following the rule. Yeah? So there's an unconditional respect for rules. Rules ought to be expected on their own, just because they are rules. And many systems cannot work without that type of fundamental respect for the rules, even if incentives are maybe to break the rules in terms of narrow motivations. Yeah? So that means there is a rule in the choir coach, nobody is around that can punish me, and I respect that rule because it says so. Yeah? Even if I think nobody would tell me off if I would use my phone, I still do it. I still respect the rule. That's what unconditional rule conformity is. This unconditional respect for rules also used to govern many nations in how they dealt with each other. Not all the time, but a lot of it. Yeah? Because the interesting thing about that type of rule-based system is that the international rule-based system was never enforced because there is no central government, world government that enforces any rules. It was always voluntary rule compliance. Yeah, so, and what that means in a nutshell is that unconditional intrinsic respect for rules is that you follow a rule even if incentives are weak or absent. Harm on others is not salient. Yeah, behavior of others is not observed, and regardless of social expectations. Yeah, that's what unconditional rule following is. So these are all motivations that people have. This is nothing new here that I'm saying. All of this has been argued in numerous papers in different ways and forms, but I think reading all of this literature suggested to me these are four fundamental aspects of human social behavior that certainly are behind rule following to some important degree, and they all seem to matter. So I decided to develop a framework, or we decided to develop a framework that we call CRISP. Yeah, and CRISP will underlie the rest of this talk. So CRISP says that rule conformity or cooperation is a function of the intrinsic respect for the rules, R, respect for rules, or do the right thing. Yeah, extrinsic incentives, PI. Yeah, social expectations, do what other people do or think one should do, and social preferences. These are four factors that have been established in many other papers without this, So that means these are fundamental motivational factors that are there, but that I think and people can have them at the same time, and we need to develop them, to study them in conjunction. That was the first idea of it. So CRISP was developed in this paper just recently published in Nature Human Behavior in the context of a very simple rule following task. Yeah, so there's no cooperation here in this paper, in the sense that you will see in a moment. This is just a very individualistic task where there is a rule that says you should stop at the traffic light until it turns green. If you do follow the rule, you lose money, and it's indicated, that there is this money counts down every second you wait. Yeah, so you're losing money by following that rule. So that means now the self-interest component says, oh, doesn't matter, I'm not getting punished here, so I jump and save money. Yeah. So the rule is, that's how the rule was implemented in this experiment. The rule is to wait until the traffic light turns green. And it was clear to people that they lose money if they follow the rule. So here is what we found in this study. So 60% of people followed the rule, 58 and 42 broke it. And so this, you see time seconds here, that there were those rule breakers, the pink one, the violet ones, and then the traffic light changed, and then everybody switched over. Yeah, so people understood this, and the rule following was 58%, despite the fact that there's nobody's harmed from this. So in terms of my framework from before, extrinsic incentives say jump, yeah, you lose money. You don't observe anybody else. There is nobody else is harmed by this, so social preferences don't matter. You don't observe anybody. You are not observed except by the experimenter. Yeah. So there is no conventional reason to follow this rule. You should just ignore it, according to all components except maybe two. Yeah, and I'll talk about them in a moment. Yeah. So you should ignore the rule because of extrinsic incentives. Extrinsic incentives clearly say you should violate the rule. Social preferences don't matter. Yeah. So these two motives don't meet, but what I can still have is, oh, there's a rule, so the respect for rules. There's somebody put the rule, I don't know why, but I respect the rule. And I also think that social expectations can still matter, because I can always imagine, even under anonymity, what would other people do in this situation. I try to conform to that. Yeah. So this is basically the finding that we got. So we measured this, the normative and the empirical expectations. So what you see here is, we ask people, do you think how socially appropriate is it to follow the rule? Virtually everybody said it's very socially appropriate to follow the rule. This rule, yeah. Whereas the majority said to violate this is inappropriate. That's what this left bar says, the right bar says, yeah. So, so this is, people say it's very socially appropriate or socially appropriate to follow the rule, to conform with it, and it's inappropriate to violate it. This rule, yeah, that means here's a rule that requires normative significance almost immediately. Yeah. Then we ask people, set of people who were explained this experiment, what do you think other people are going to do? Yeah. And they said 60% said they will follow the rule. So descriptive beliefs. Yeah. So people think there's a rule that they expect that people will follow the rule, 60%, which coincides with what we actually observe pretty well. Yeah. And okay, you could say now, this is social expectations. This is, this is descriptive beliefs, what do other people do? Normative beliefs, what do you think one should do? Yeah. So the question is, do people conform with those beliefs? If you conform with those beliefs, you need to condition your choice or follow the rule on those beliefs. Because if you say, okay, I might believe these things, but it doesn't affect my behavior, yeah, then behavior would be unconditional on those beliefs. So we elicited conditionality, yeah, using a tool called the strategy method, where we ask them for each of possible behaviors of other people, for a set of possible behavior of other people, what do you do, conform or violate? Yeah. And what you see here is that this is others disapprove of rules. So then we see that, virtually everybody disapproves of the rule, or virtually everybody approves. Virtually nobody disapproves of the rule of violating, and virtually everybody disapproves of violating the rule, you see conditionally increasing compliance. And the same is true, the percent of others violating the rule, the more conformist the rule, the more people conform, the more compliance, the higher compliance is. So on average, people are conditional rule followers, this means. Yeah? So this means that a simple abstract rule that has transparently no negative consequences, yeah, is followed by 60% of people. The rule has normative significance. People believe it will be followed, and people's behavior is conditional on those who will follow it, on those social expectations. That's what this says. Yeah. So, and then what we also did is in this paper we then said, okay, now this is in situation where there is no punishment. There is no reason to follow the rule. There's also no externality, so nobody is harmed by a rule violation. Yeah. So what we did in another set of experiments in that paper is we replicated our experiment called baseline. Yeah, and we found again very similar rule following rates of 55% in this baseline setting where there is no reason to follow the rule. About half of that, 27%, was unconditional rule following. I mean, people follow the rule regardless of what their beliefs are. Yeah? Unconditional. That's evidence. What this says is people follow rules for two reasons. Unconditional respect for the rule, 27%, and another 27 or 28% follow the rule to match social expectations. Yeah. So that's are the two reasons that can explain why people follow rules, even if nobody's harmed and there's no punishment. So now, okay, you can say this is very abstract. What do we learn from this? Because in reality, there are often negative. We have rules because there's reasons to have them, you know, to prevent negative consequences to have collective benefits. So what we did in another experiment is now we added an externality. We said we donated $1 to the Red Cross preliminarily, and if you violate the rule, this donation is lost. So now somebody is harmed by a rule violation, which is typically the case when we have rules. Yeah? So the rule compliance. Now social preferences can matter. They can't matter in baseline, but now they can matter because now somebody is negatively affected by my rule violation. And what happens? Cooperation or rule following goes up. Yeah, and unconditional goes up as well. Yeah. So then what we also have now in reality is incentives. There is punishment for rule violations. We did two versions of this, weak punishment. So that means punishment meant you lose your payoff, all of your payoff, if you're violated the rule, if you violate the rule, and if you are detected, which happens a probability of 10%. Yeah. So there is actually no real incentive to do it, and consistent with what the economists would predict in this case, doesn't move behavior at all. Yeah. And then we had strong punishment probability. Again, you lose your money if you violate the rule, but the probability of detection is now 90%. So you're very likely to lose your money if you violate the rule, and cooperation or rule following jumps up. Again, as predicted by the narrow econ argument. So what you see here is in this experiment, this series of experiments, these are all nested experiments, is that everything that I talked about matters here. Yeah? There's unconditional rule following, matching social expectations. This is what we see in baseline. Social preferences matter. That's the only thing that changes from baseline to the experiment X with externality, negative consequences for the Red Cross in this case. Yeah. So and punishment matters if it's strong enough. Yeah. So incentives also matter. So it means all four elements of the CRISP framework that I introduced before here, now established in one entirely comparable experimental design, suggest that all four motives, even in the simplest situation you can have, matter and affect behavior. So that's what this paper established. And I think that is basically the lesson I take from this, is that all these motives are behavior relevant, and therefore they might play out in many other situations. And one of them is what we're going to study now, which now we study proper cooperation in a game of cooperation. But before I move there, any questions about this? All clear what I'm supposed to do? Yes, please.
So you said that the rules, the setting is abstract. However, this is an assumption, because there is always a real-world association, especially with the experiment you're doing, with the traffic lights. There is a real-world association, and the assumption that people basically follow the rules just because they have intrinsic respect for rules, I think this is also another assumption, because they might have already internalized to follow the rule with the real-world association. And besides that, there is also another context, which is the experimenter and the participant context, where, yes, you're saying that you don't explicitly say that there is no punishment, but because they have internalized to expect punishment every time they are presented with a rule, they might still expect punishment. So how do you differentiate this from intrinsic respect for rules?
Okay, thanks. That's a very good questions. So first answer is, of course, this is a very good observation that you made here about the traffic light. So we developed an entirely, now 4 experiments, 4 different paradigms. Yeah, that this exact same thing occurs. So the first one is we translated this into a completely abstract design where there was no traffic light, but just an X. Yeah. It says you have to wait until the X disappears, but not really a traffic light. Yeah, there's no real world association to that. Same sort of rule following behavior. Yeah. Another experiment where we put coins on the screen. Money. Yeah, you would see how they tick down every second. So it's very salient that you're losing money. Yeah, and same thing, same rule following rates. And another design we have is called the Y design, so which is it's like Y-shaped, and you're told you have to move left, but you earn more money if you move left or right, yeah, or the other way around. So it's not the context that matters here. So this is a very robust finding that I have replicated 4 times, at least. Yeah, so I don't think it's that. So of course, so the way we do experiments, at least in our lab, and the thing is, it's transparently obvious that they cannot get punished here. Yeah. So can I completely exclude this? No, I cannot. Yeah, because the downside of intrinsic respect for rules is I cannot look into people's brain. Yeah. However, what we try to do is we try to elicit people's motivations, and when we ask them why they followed the rule, they said, yeah, because there was a rule. Yeah, and some people said, those who broke the rule, they said, because I earned more money by violating it. Yeah. So again, there is no end to this story, so that I can say it's completely settled what intrinsic rule compliance is. Yeah. However, yeah, what this says, yeah, this, yeah. Even if it's clear, if you see that nobody here, whatever the exact reasoning behind for people is, even if nobody disapproves, if nobody complies here, there is still a fraction of about 25% to 30% of people who say, I follow this rule regardless of what others do or what I think others are, how they disapprove or approve of that. Yeah, it's independent of that. And it's again something we have replicated a few times now. We've done an experiment as part of that paper, where you saw 6 people in front of you violating the rule. And rule following was still about 50%. Yeah. So there is something that suggests that people follow rules because there are rules. Yeah. So what exactly goes on in people's brain and neurology or whatever the reason for that is, I don't know. What I'm talking about here is in terms of the framework is these are observable things. There is an observable cost or benefit. That's what, that is part of the environment. You're supposed to buy a train ticket, or a ticket for public transport. That's the rule, buy a ticket. And it's clear that there's a statement that says you pay £100 if we find you without a ticket. Yeah. So these are the incentives. That's what we can manipulate. Yeah. Of course, the same behavior, I might buy a ticket because everybody buys a ticket. I might buy a ticket because I think I have to do my part to sustain public transport, so social preferences type thing. And I buy a ticket because I think that's simply the right thing to do, even if I observe that there are lots of free riders on the tram. Yeah, that's unconditional behavior. I think the behavior is much more general. Yeah. I think these are 4 basic motivations that were not new to do this. Yeah? The motivations as such are not new. What is new here is that we do all of this in an entirely comparable setting. Yeah? So we can establish their relative importance in one comparable setting. And that means that's proof of concept that this is a useful framework. And now I take it to the next level and study cooperation proper. Yeah? So that's what this paper does. It's now, I try to do a crisp explanation of cooperation and rule following. So the paper is called Cooperating with Rules, because we now introduce it to rule set, to proper social dilemma problems. Yeah. So what we do is we study these things together in one comparable setup. So what we have done so far is rule following outside a cooperation problem. So that's pure rule following. And we compare cooperation without explicit rules. That's what we have done in the past. Lots of cooperation research is most of it. Yeah. The large 99.99% of it so far is done without any explicit rule. Yeah. And we compare it to cooperation with explicit rules, which is many cases that I tried to introduce at the beginning. There are rules. Yeah. You should do something, and I can follow those rules many times to some degree or completely, not necessarily always binary. I can have been a full rule complier or a partial rule complier in many cases, so we bring these things, we study these things together. Yeah. So again, the crisp idea. So what we now do is, in this case, we do not study punishment here. There is no punishment. So in all experiments, there is an incentive to break the rule. Yeah? That's the interesting case in many real-world situations. Yeah? What happens if you have an incentive to break the rule? Do you still follow the rule or not? Yeah? We've already seen the answer is yes. Under some conditions, people do follow the rule. Yeah? Despite the fact that you have an incentive to break it. Yeah? So now, in that setting, cooperation in cooperation P, so the social preferences of CRISP, the element can matter because my decision to cooperate or to defect or partially cooperate affects other people by definition of the public good, yeah, the social dilemma. Behavior affects other people. Yeah. So, whereas in pure rule following, which you introduce here as a boundary condition, if you want, as a separate condition, we switch P off. Yeah, P cannot matter because nobody is affected. So that's how we can play around in this framework with the elements of CRISP. Yeah. And what we also do is, because we have seen that people conform with social expectations, so what you think other people do, yeah, and we also elicit those social expectations and the conformity functions in all settings. Yeah. So, okay. So, so what we again try to do is to make, we don't do a series of experiments that are not really comparable. So what we do is we do a series of experiments, 5 treatments that are comparable, yeah, completely. So in this first study here, we had 4,000 people. We do a pure rule following task of the sort that we have seen before. A comparison setting with no rule, just to find out whether people figure it out that there's no rule what to do in this case. Yeah, the public good without a rule, a public good with a rule, and a public good with a social rule. Yeah, this is how it looks like. So we use what's called the bucket task from Kimbrough for Stroknotov. Yeah, so you have tokens here, and there's a blue bucket and a yellow bucket, and the rule says you should to the blue bucket, yeah, which is the public good. If it's in a public good, if this is a public good setting, it means we tell people the blue whatever you put into the blue bucket, we multiply it by 2 and distribute it equally among all the 4 group members. So now I'm benefiting, yeah, from whatever has been put into the blue bucket because it's doubled, and I get something regardless of from the blue bucket, regardless of whether I have contributed or not. You know, that's called the public goods game, public goods problem. Is that clear? Because that's the game I'm talking about for the rest of this talk. Yeah, everything that's in the blue bucket is doubled and shared equally among all group members. I still, from an individualistic point of view, cost benefit, that's the sole reason I look at this. This looks like a bad deal to me. Yeah, I'm giving one token away. I only get half back because although it's doubled, I personally only get half back. So give up 1 to get back half sounds like a bad deal. Yeah. So from that perspective, I shouldn't put anything into the blue bucket. Cost benefit says it's clear that you should keep the tokens for yourself. Yeah, higher return. But of course, other people benefit. If I have social preferences, that was the first set of experiments that tried to establish this. People still put tokens in because other people benefit and I benefit from them. Yeah. So, okay, so that's what they said. The rule is to place the tokens into the blue bucket. And that's the rule for the social rule, public good with social rule, because it helps other group members. So the difference between these 2 treatments here is, there's a public good. It's this game just says simply put the tokens into the blue bucket. And here we give a justification, yeah, called a social rule, so because it helps other people. So it's sort of a pseudo reason, but it gives a justification because most rules come with some sort of explicit or implicit justification. Yeah. So is that clear? That's the design. Yeah. Again, everything's comparable. There's only one change between things. And so we listed all these elements of CRISP to understand what's common, what's different between these settings. Pure rule following, no rule, public good with rule, public good with social rule. All governed by the same behavioral framework. That's the assumption that whose element we now elicit for each of them. Is that clear? So, okay, allocations to the blue bucket, that's the, so first thing is we just look at what happens here. Yeah, what happens. So let's start with things that doesn't seem to be working, so, so sorry that this is not working. Let me see whether it works if I show you no, it's not working. So I'm sorry. So what you should be seeing here, I'm sorry, this is, I use a Mac and this sometimes happens that it's not working, it's not showing the animation. So, sorry. Yeah, what you're supposed to see here is that it's completely shifted everything. So this is, you cannot see anything here. I'm sorry. Completely garbage. So what you should see here is there is virtually no rule following, no allocation to the blue bucket if there is no rule, which is people figure it out that they lose money if they put things in the blue bucket. So that means it's not that they don't understand where the incentives are. They understand the incentives. That's why we did this. When we had a rule, we said put the tokens into the blue bucket. About 50% put all 5 tokens into the blue bucket. The median was 4. The average was 3.5 or 6. Yeah. When we say in the public good, without the rule, we have it's spread out. And when we have a social rule, it shifts again a bit. So that means people follow the rule as said before. And people cooperate, as I said before, and having a rule means people cooperate more, they contribute more. So behaviorally, the rule works as intended, cooperation increases. Yeah? And complete free riding, not putting anything into the blue bucket is now very minimal. Yeah? So that means, but okay, that's just the behavioral outcome. We are interested not just in outcomes. So the perspective that I'm offering here is it's not enough, in my view, just to look at outcomes. What do people do? So this might be the primary interest. But the question is what happens, so to speak, underneath the whole thing. Why do people do what they do? And the CRISP frameworks, the idea there is to develop, is to understand behavior as a function of those four elements that I have introduced before. Yeah, the respect for rules, the social expectations, the incentives, and the social preferences. So that's what we try to do here. So how do rules affect social expectations? And rule conformity is the first central question we answer. So again, descriptive beliefs, how many balls did others put into the blue bucket? Yeah, what do I think others did? The normative beliefs are, what do you think is appropriate? Personal, now we distinguish also between personal normative beliefs. What do you think is appropriate for you from your personal perspective, regardless of what other people do? Yeah? And social appropriateness means, social normative beliefs means, what do you think the average thinks is appropriate? Not about your personal opinion, what do you think others think one should do here? Okay? Personal is irrespective what I personally, individually think. Social means what I think others do, regardless of my personal opinion. Yeah. So, and we also elicit these conformity functions. So, do people condition their allocation to the blue bucket on their descriptive and normative beliefs? Why is that important to elicit, to understand? Because these beliefs can only matter behaviorally if people condition their choice on those beliefs. Yeah? I might have these beliefs. Suppose if I'm a defector, I'm a free rider, I might think that everyone else is nice and cooperative, but I couldn't care less. My belief is correct. People cooperate. But sorry, mates, not for me. Yeah, not in my interest. So other people say, okay, I think others will do it, and therefore I do it too. So I condition my choice on others. Or the pessimistic conditional cooperator who says, I don't think that people will contribute here anything, or I observe that people don't, and therefore I also don't. Yeah? So people condition their behavior, and beliefs can only matter for behavior if people condition on them. For that reason, we elicit not just their beliefs, but also their conditionality functions. Yeah? So descriptive beliefs. How many out of 100 people do you think placed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tokens into the blue bucket? So here is the averages. So this is the average belief in the blue bucket. You see that there is, the highest belief is this social rule, and for the others, it's similar. Yeah, and but still people believe baseline rule following. People believe it's more than this just no rule. That's just how the descriptive beliefs look like in this setting. Yeah. So then we, yes.
In the PGG game, like
yes.
With or without rules, is it correct?
There is no difference in beliefs here. Yeah.
Like in PGG, but in the regular game, you have to find. So just wanted to check it.
PGG is the public goods game. Yeah. Base PGG means there's no rule. Mm-hmm. Base PGG rule says there's now this rule added. It says you should put your tokens into the blue bucket. That's what PGG rule means. PGT social rule means put the tokens into the blue bucket because it helps other people. That's what this means.
Yeah. Base
PGG is the standard game. Yeah. Yeah. Here is the blue bucket, here's the yellow bucket. If you put tokens into the blue bucket, we double everything and give and share it out equally among the 4 of you. That's all you know there. Okay. Yeah. In the PGG rule, you know exactly that too. But there is also this rule that says put it into the blue bucket. That's the rule. Yeah. It doesn't shift beliefs, but it does shift behavior.
Only the social interest.
Okay, is that clear? Okay, so now we look at conditional cooperation. So this says enter the number of tokens you want to place in the blue bucket. If the average number of tokens placed in the blue bucket by the 3 other group members randomly selected is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tokens. So we elicit the conditional conformity functions with the descriptive beliefs for the 3 public goods. You see that here. So you see that this is average tokens by others. And now I ask you to tell me for each one of those possible levels what you would do, how much you contribute. And this is conditionality function is clearly increasing in all 3 public goods. Yeah? And it's highest for social, with the public good with the social rule. Yeah? Is that clear? So for the conformity with descriptive beliefs about rule compliance and cooperation. So here is an first important finding. So this finding is well established in lots of literatures. People are conditional cooperators, and I've shown this. Many others have shown this many times using this methodology or something related. Yeah, so this is expected. So now, what's interesting now is what we can now do is how does conditionality, conditional cooperation, differ from rule following, which we can now distinguish. Yeah, and that's how it is. So this dark line here, dark blue line, is the average of the 3 lines you've seen before. Yeah, and you see something interesting here. First thing is this here is now the average conditional rule following. And you see 2 things. If we compare it to this, is the published good. So here, nobody is affected by construction. There is no negative consequences for other people. No social preferences can matter. It's just the rule. Yeah? And people's behavior is conditional, but less than in the public good. Yeah? This is steeper. This means, this is steeper here. This line, this cooperation, than this. This also means, here is average tokens allocated of others. If the others don't do anything, public goods people do, on average, contribute a little bit, on average, so about 1, which means this is unconditional cooperation. It's minimal, but it exists. It's minimal, but exists, on average, whereas this unconditional rule following is highly significantly and almost double that of unconditional cooperation. So people are much more likely to be unconditional rule followers than to be unconditional cooperators. Yeah, that's one thing. But both is conditional, rule following is less conditional than cooperation is conditional. Yeah? This makes sense because in cooperation other people are affected, and if others don't play ball, i.e. others don't contribute to the public good, I might as well also not do it that much. Yeah? Rule following is less conditional, but it follows the same logic. Yeah? It's more unconditional overall, and this slope is flatter. So that the interesting thing here is this is no rule. Yeah? So there's no rule. And the incentive is put nothing into the blue bucket. And 75% of people figure it out. Yeah? But people still conform. Oh, if other people do it, I do it too. Yeah? So there's pure conformity here. This is pure conformism. Yeah? That I do what other people do to some extent, just because other people do it. This is Ash-like behavior. Yeah? So everybody's saying this line is shorter or longer. Yeah? So I do it too. So that's this type of giving in to conformity, to do what other people do in its pure form. Yeah? Which is part of this too, which also tells us that part of conditional cooperation and rule following is pure conformism. Is the interpretation here. Again, this doesn't seem to work, so to skip it. So normative beliefs. So we elicit now what one should do. Again, remember, personal norm is, here's the formulation that we used, is what do you personally think one should do? According to your own opinion, Yeah, and independent of the opinion of others, what do you think is the most appropriate amount of tokens to place in the blue bucket? You personally, yeah. And normative beliefs, which we think we take as the average beliefs about the personal norm. How many out of 100 people do you think answered that they think it is most appropriate to place the number into the blue bucket? So now again, it's not my personal opinion, it's what I think. Yeah, that personal opinion is the first one. This is, I think one should contribute 5 tokens, but I don't think other people think that. Yeah, so it allows for this distinction. So, and again, here is this is again garbage up a bit, so descriptive beliefs here. Yeah, okay. And again, these descriptive beliefs here, it looks similar to the descriptive beliefs. So conformity functions also look similar. Yeah, here. So again, we see that people think it's pure conformity. Yeah, here, and here is the public good scale, and is again steeper than the rule following. So here it has worked for some reason. So this is conditionality. Here it says that because we have this function now. This function is for every person, so we can classify them as people who are unconditional rule breakers, unconditional cooperators, or unconditional rule followers, yeah, or defectors, and that's what we see here. So, for instance, so this is with no rule. There are what we call free riders here. That they don't put anything into the blue bucket. There are the conditional people with no rule. They do put in something if others do it. There are unconditional rule followers here. For instance, in the baseline rule following, about 17% are unconditional rule followers, and 13% are unconditional free riders here. Yeah? And conditionality increases strongly in the public good scales, yeah? Which makes sense. Yeah? If others are affected, I'm more conditional than others. Okay, let's keep this and say the following. So now this were all what maybe I didn't say this clearly. Everything we have just seen, we established in between subject experiments, meaning different set of people did these elucidations. So why did we do that? Yeah, because it gives us a clear measure that's independent of any spillover. Yeah, so we established the existence of each of these motives independently, as we have done in our first CRISP paper on rule following. But in reality, and that's what interests me now, is I might have these motives at the same time. It's inter-individual. I might be motivated by a desire to follow rules. I might be motivated by some degree of conditionality to do what other people do. I might be motivated by social preferences. And all of these things can happen at the same time. I might say, okay, and this is why when we want to explain why people follow rules, the difficulty there is there's a confluence of motivations that people can have at the same time. I might, if I sit in the choir coach, I might think it's the right thing to do, to follow these rules. I might think, okay, it's inconsiderate to use my phone, and therefore I don't do it. And I might tell everybody else seems to be obeying this rule, let's say, and therefore I do it. And I even do it if I even don't talk or use my phone if other people obviously seem to be violating this rule. That's unconditional rule following. In these naturally occurring situations, I cannot disentangle this. And our experiments have disentangled the existence of these motivations. Yeah? But I think overall, the interesting thing is about this, I think that we can have these motives at the same time. So what we now do is we replicate everything I've just seen within subjects. Yeah? So we elicit all these things from the same people. Yeah? So which allows us to put everything together. Yeah? So we do the same thing. The upshot is the results are very similar. So in terms of descriptive beliefs, is what we see here. Yeah. Normative beliefs, Yeah, and conditionality functions also look very similar. So the fact that we did elicit this within subject didn't seem to have distorted the elicitation at all, or by very little. Yeah. Which I think, because we have the comparison of between subject and within subject, we can say that. Yeah. So, but this allows us now to put these things together and to study how these factors explain what people do in these experiments, which we couldn't do before. Yeah. Okay, so here's another tool that I need for this. It's called the ABC approach, yeah, which I have established in many papers, including with Ozan Isler, who many of you probably know. Yeah, so it's called the ABC approach. And what do I mean by that? So ABC means the cooperation is a function of my attitudes, my conditional attitudes, and the beliefs. Yeah. Attitudes is the conformity functions that we elicit from each individual. How much do you condition your contribution or your rule following on your beliefs? Yeah. And let's say it looks typically like that on average, yeah, in a public good game. So that's what you have seen before. So this, maybe go back one sec. So these functions, these are the functions. Yeah. So there are different types. Let's say conditional cooperators condition, the free riders don't. Yeah. And then, you know, a conditional cooperator, therefore, we calculate their predicted contribution as a belief. Let's say if they say they expect little cooperation of others, we expect little contributions of others. Or if I expect that others will contribute a lot, I expect a higher contribution. Yeah. We can calculate this based on these conditionality functions for each individual. That's what we call their predicted contribution. Then we can compare that. Yeah. So that's what you see here is a comparison of predicted to actual. And this, if it's exactly the same, we are at 0, which is where the bulk of observations actually lie. Yeah. You see here blue, this is from the paper with Ozan Isler. And here we have 2 treatments. In these 2 treatments, we have different conditionality functions, but the ABC prediction is equally correct in all of them. Yeah. So that means this is a model. ABC is a model that predicts reasonably successfully what people do, given their attitudes, there's conditionality, free rider, conditional cooperator, and their beliefs. That predicts what they do. Yeah. Okay. So, so we put this into action here. So we see here that we can now use this, since we have the conditionality from the descriptive beliefs, so what do you think others do, and the conditionality from the normative beliefs, we can calculate predictions for both of them. And here you see them in the figure. This is just the average here. Yeah. We can impose them. So the diamonds, the red thing here, this is the ABC prediction. This is a bit too high here, it's a little bit too low here, it's on spot here. It's a bit too low, but overall it tracks what's actually happening. So that means we can now explain cooperation as a function of the descriptive belief, the attitudes, the conditionality, and the beliefs predict the contributions. Yeah. So I think I skip this and move to the last point, social preferences. And that says, okay, what I have done so far is when we switch in these previous experiments, what we have done is we switched the possibility that social preferences matter on and off. Yeah. In my rule following experiment, I said, the pure rule following, there is no negative consequences for other people because nobody is affected. Yeah. Then we had a treatment, remember, where we provisionally donated money to the Red Cross. If you violated the rule, this money was lost. Rule following increased. In public goods, in cooperation, there is always, P always matters. Social preference can always matter because other people are affected by design, by design, yeah, by the nature of things, by the nature of a public good. Yeah, I'm affected. therefore social preferences matter there. Yeah, so we have seen this because cooperation is higher with rules than without. So the question is, okay, what we can say there is, okay, social preferences matter, but it's a black box. What we now do is, as part of this CRISP methodology and CRISP framework, we measure those social preferences directly using different tools. Some of the tools, let's say, there are experiments that are designed to measure advantageous inequality aversion, which you see here. I don't explain exactly how we do this now, but just standard experimental techniques of measuring advantageous inequality aversion. This means, I don't like inequality where I'm the beneficiary of the inequality. I get the longer end of the stick. I don't like that. That's the advantageous inequality aversion. And then there is also disadvantageous inequality aversion, which is I really dislike getting less than you. I also don't like if I get more than Ono-chan. Both of these things are inequality aversion. Fehr and Schmidt have established this theoretically, and it's the most influential social preference in economics, at least, around that. And what you see here is what you see here now is here all 5 treatments. These are estimated coefficient sizes, and disadvantageous inequality aversion affects neither cooperation nor rule following, nor no rule. Explains nothing. It's not matter. Doesn't matter. What matters is maybe as predicted in rule following and public goods, but not necessarily in public goods with rules. Social preferences do matter in how people behave, have an influence. Social value orientation, that is maybe closer to home here. So measured with the slider method, so we can calculate an angle. It shouldn't explain what people do in no rule, because it's not affected by this. It has some influence, maybe unexpectedly, in rule following. It's positive in the public goods games. So which is consistent with the literature on that. Then there's a fourth thing called fair-mindedness, which is just measures how much weight do you put on other people's payoffs, and it's actually, this looks a little bit the wrong way around, but it is the right way around, because fair-mindedness is scaled the other way around. So it suggests that in the public goods game it has the biggest influence, but it's not very important in the other stuff. So I skip this. So that means, again, what we have established here at the individual level, how these things matter. This is just an attempt. This can all be improved upon. In terms of methodology, we have shown here that what I have, all the elements of CRISP that I've introduced before have explanatory power in explaining to us why people follow rules and why people cooperate. And we can now discuss, and I haven't done this here because we haven't established that properly yet, is maybe putting weights on things depending on the situation. How important are social preferences relative to the beliefs, relative to conditionality, relative to these 4 elements of CRISP, for a given situation. Okay, final discussion here. So what I've tried to convince you is that rule following and cooperation are ubiquitous features of human cooperation, or if not social behavior. So that's what sociality means, to a significant practical degree. Rules are the main tool to achieve large-scale cooperation. It's typically not putting money into a pot. That's then used for a funding drive. That happens too, but most of the time, large-scale cooperation means follow the rules. So we study rule following. So up until now, I think the the unsatisfactory situation is that we have different approaches in social sciences that all have arguments going for it, but it's all disparate. Yeah, we have the economists, and okay, more or less just extrinsic incentives to rule of the game. Oh, no, actually social preferences also matter. Then come the sociologists and psychologists say, your economists get it all wrong. It's not incentives. People are just imitators or conformists or that. And come the legal philosophers who say people have to follow rules and respect them. And it's that element that's really crucial, but there's no evidence for any of it in a comparable fashion. Yeah. There is evidence, the most evidence there was is on the first three elements, but the intrinsic respect for rules, that there's something like unconditional rule following. This evidence, to my knowledge, was first shown we have first shown this in the 2025 paper. Because there we have the methodology to establish this existence of unconditional rule following using the methodology that I defended before. So, so it's a thing that exists, and it's a good question what explains it, and going further in understanding why people are unconditional rule followers and under which conditions. Yeah, so the interdisciplinary endeavor here is try to capture that in CRISP. So these are motives, as I said before, that have been established before in different social science disciplines. Yeah. We have brought it together, and I think we try to develop a manageable framework that we can use to design studies and study social situations, taking into account those different elements. Yeah? So it's an attempt to integrate behavioral mechanism from the behavioral sciences based on a shared methodology. And that's the new thing about it. Yeah? Not the motives themselves. If you want, RISP has been established or argued before, but not in a shared methodology. Yeah? I think that's where the advantage, or where the advance, in my opinion, lies, not just from our paper, but also in future research. Yeah. So what this achieves is that it tells us not just what's happening, but also, let's say, the behavioral architecture, the mechanisms, the reasons behind it, behind the rule following cooperation. It's also, it's not just restricted to that what we have seen before. I think if these elements are generic motivational forces, and we have the CRISP perspective, we can use it to study any root of interest or any situation that we want to investigate using this perspective. Yeah. So, and what I have started to do a little bit is to, and I didn't really talk about this, but because it's still in its infancy, is that what are the interconnections between the CRISP elements. So we wouldn't expect necessarily that there are 4 orthogonal motives. Yeah. There is trade-offs between this. If I might be an unconditional rule follower, but let's say those people who protest Putin's war, there are sometimes people protesting alone. Yeah. They risk going to be sent to Siberia for sticking up to that. But nobody seems to be out on the street, so it's not going with the flow about demonstrating. It's you're alone saying, I protest the war. Yeah. So this is unconditional behavior. Yeah. It's motivated. Of course, there are very few people who do that. Why? Because you might be sent to Siberia if you do that. Yeah. So, but still, it's an example of that unconditional behavior, unconditional cooperation, and there are trade-offs that I think are interesting to study. Yeah. Another thing is, you have this unconditional behavior. Yeah. It might start a cascade, of people. Or if not because people are conditional, I think these unconditional people. I think, okay, if they do it, I can do it too. So then, okay, other people have higher thresholds, and all of a sudden we have a swelling of participation. So this was, for instance, the case with the Future Fridays, or what it was called. The climate movement started by Greta Thunberg, who was also the lone protester at the beginning, and then lots of young people joined, and then because it was becoming a mass movement, lots of other people joined too. So it can explain, this is unconditional behavior, even if it's small, can be very important for starting something. Yeah. So of course, social preferences, they are interesting because they might influence, how conditional I am. So there's a relationship between social preferences and conditionality. Conditional cooperation can be explained by social preferences, but not only. It's also a function of pure conformism. So there are interlinkages between these elements of CRISP, which I think are exciting, in my view, for future research. Thank you very much.
Now it's time for questions, and maybe I can start since the microphone is with me. So the first time I see your CRISP model, I thought, where's the harm perception? Do you think that it's included as a form of extrinsic incentives?
Say, what is excluded as?
Harm perception.
Harm perception?
Yeah.
No, it's part of the social my methodology of the social preferences. What happens to other people, and do I care about that? That's what social preferences are. Yeah, social preferences mean to me, that doesn't have to be always positive. You can have social preferences of the Trump type, yeah. So domination. I want to dominate people. That's a social preference. I want to be lower. I want to make sure that other people are lower than I am. It's a negative social preference, which I have not studied yet, yeah, but it's interesting. The point is not that social preferences are always positive. So far, in most of the literature, we have studied positive social preferences. I care about other people. Yeah? If I do this, somebody is harmed. If I take my phone out and do my phone call, those people who have booked a ticket in the quiet coach are now harmed because of that. Therefore, I don't do it. Yeah? There are, of course, people who do it exactly because of that. Yeah? They go to the quiet coach and take their phone out just to piss these people off. Yeah?
Yeah. So you say a harm perception, it's included like in social preferences in your model. Okay. Also, another note that I took, it's like, you measured disadvantaged inequality aversion and advantaged inequality aversion. And, we are trying to test generalized social heuristics hypothesis with you. Maybe it's very related. I don't know how you measure these, but I think we should use it in our studies. And the other topic I should mention is that maybe, morality theories, there are lots of morality theories, and some says that morality is equal to cooperation, just like what you said about rule following and cooperation. I hope I didn't get it wrong.
No.
And there are lots of intuitive heuristics, intuitive elements as part of, like morality elements. And I thought that, beyond these intuitive morality elements, foundations, rule following was like, a reflective part of such a moral dimension. But as we see, if there is unconditional rule following and unconditional cooperation, then maybe rule following is also a part of moral element intuitively. What do you think about that?
Yes, so in my framework, I would slot rule following morality into the R element, so the respect, do the right thing. One, you can think of, I called R is respect for rules, but you can also think in general, let's do the right thing, whatever. Something that morality is independent of these other motivations. It's not an extrinsic incentive, morality as such, it's a normative. Yeah? It's also not about the beliefs what others do or what think one should do. Although, again, this is part of what I said at the end. Morality might influence what I think personally is the right thing to do. So the personal norms is closest to the R element here. Yeah. But of course, morality might also think, if I think other people are influenced by that morality, it might influence my social normative beliefs, what I think the norm is, yeah? What other people think one should do here. So there is an element, there is a linkage, depending on the situation, where there is a flow from R to S. Yeah. But what do I think? It could say, because many people believe that one should do that, I believe that people will follow the rule, because one should follow the rule here. Therefore, that's an unconditional thing. are respect the rule, do the right thing, contribute. Because I reason that other people think that too, that means I believe other people will do it. It's the descriptive beliefs. It gives me, because the conditional cooperators are now thinking because other people do it, I do it too. Yeah. So so what's interesting about this, I think, the way things are at the moment is we have established so far the independent existence of these four motivations and their independent influence on behavior. That's where we are. What's interesting is asking questions like you, yeah, is how do these elements affect each other? Yeah, and you can think another way of thinking it. It's a static version of what we have now. Think of it like these are behavioral forces that pull you into some direction. Yeah. So in an ideal situation of pro-social cooperation, you have the incentives, the norms, the rules. Yeah, the respect for the rules, the R element, the social beliefs, social expectations all align, and social preferences all aligned up. In that case, cooperation is easy to establish. Incentives go there. The morality says we should do it, or the do the right thing says we should do it. Social preferences do it. Other people are doing it too, which is a very important behavioral force. Do people follow the rules? Do people cooperate? Because people are conditional cooperators, that alone induces people to cooperate. So this is like behavioral forces that point people into different directions. And they might align with each other, in which case they reinforce each other, or they might pull in separate directions. If they pull in separate directions, we need to understand the trade-offs. So that's what I think is interesting about this. Now, I think now, that's at least my hope is that we can use now, rather than having these debates, across the social sciences, yeah, we are better than you are. Economists used to believe that in particular, yeah, because you social scientists, you don't understand incentives. Incentives is each and everything. Yeah, maybe not. So there are other things too, but incentives are important too. It's obvious from all the experiments and all the studies, the incentives are important. It's not just, incentives are always important because there are selfish people out there, yeah, who only work under those incentives. Yeah, but they are not the only ones. So it's interesting how these things influence each other. And I think now we have a much more productive, at least potential of, okay, when we break things down into manageable chunks of behavioral motivations, these four elements, yeah, unconditional behavior, incentives, social expectations, and social preferences, then we can study their interactions, in situations of interest in a much more productive way, I think, yeah, rather than, oh, it's just incentives, or ignoring incentives, which many other social scientists have done. I say it's not incentive. There were these unfruitful debates when I was young about psychologists saying, well, you economists, people are not just doing incentives because look at this game, they did this or that situation, we cannot explain it with your incentive model. They were right, but they drew the wrong conclusion, partly because of insufficiently good models of saying incentives are not. Incentives are important for some people at least. Yeah? Some people are only motivated by incentives. Yeah? So many people are motivated by incentives and something else. Yeah? Incentives say, okay, if other people cooperate, I do it too, which means it's not purely by incentives. Yeah? At least in this type of situations. So I think that's,
Thank you so much. And we can have other questions.
Can I talk without the mic? Can you hear me? No? Okay. I'm not very comfortable with that. Thank you very much for this talk. It's really good to have a model on cooperation, and I think it would facilitate thinking and working on this topic. And really, thank you so much. I had two things in mind. One is a question, and then the other one is a remark. So I was thinking about this rule. Can there be a rule without punishment? What does a rule mean without punishment? Or when you present a rule, does it implicitly mean that there is a social, economic, some sort of punishment behind? Mm-hmm. And the second question is about.
Can I answer that straight?
Yes, please.
Okay, so no, I say, of course, in practice you are right. You're exactly right. Sometimes let's say, take my example of the choir coach again. why? One reason why I don't use my phone, although I have the urge to use it, is because I think I might be told off, and that's embarrassing. That's punishment. It might happen. It might not happen. Yeah? Why do I buy a ticket? Yeah, because I don't want to pay the fine. So yeah. So that's all clear, and I think my framework, the first results that I showed, this is clearly affecting behavior. And actually, when it comes to the incentives, exactly as economics predicts it, at least in the direction, not necessarily in levels, but weak incentives, no influence on behavior, strong incentives, influence on behavior. That's exactly what econ would say there. So what the advantage of this is that in the experiment, we can switch off those incentives, yeah, and we still have lots of rule following. I think that's so this is why I meant this, there's a confluence of reasons in reality why people follow rules. Yeah. This is what the advantage of these experiments is. They show you the separate elements, yeah, of what affects people's behavior. Of course, in reality, that's the case. In reality, many rules come with punishment, formal punishment, informal punishment, and therefore people develop a heuristic. Maybe that's part of it. That's part of the thing. What I think is interesting to study is why do people follow rules? Maybe they use it as a heuristic. I'm not excluding that. It's part of my R element. Yeah? Maybe I go through life. I should follow rules, and I don't know. I just follow them. That's what, and it may be part of a value consideration, but it might also be part of heuristic. Yeah, or a combination of those things, and it depends on the situation. Yeah, but the thing is, rules are not always enforced. Yeah, the interesting thing is exactly that's what the philosophers and law theorists have argued. Is for that reason, social systems can only work if people also follow the rule and respect the law and stuff. If there is no punishment for it. Yeah.
This actually brings to your point to my second question, kind of on the same page with you about that, and thank you. Together with 3 collaborators of mine, this is an also interdisciplinary work with one economist from Bonn, Sebastian Kube.
Also my co-author on some of the rule following stuff.
Okay, good, great.
So
with Ann-Kristin Posten and Joris Lammer, so we had a PNAS paper like 2025 on this punishment and cooperation and what happens when we remove sanctions, and we actually replaced in this paper the sanctions with what now you call social norms, not social. I took a note. So what we called it vertical communication of trust, but it's more social norms or social preference, not social preferences, but social expectations, right? So we replaced it, yes. And we did see that this introducing social expectations or manipulating social expectation through vertical communication of trust actually maintains cooperation when we remove the punishment. Our argument was that, hey, when we say that there's a punishment, we also signal people that there will be free riders. So that's why we think that this mechanism works, because this descriptive norm, establishing descriptive norm again. When we remove sanctions, cooperation will continue. When I see your results, like the bar graphs, I noticed that like the what was the name of this condition? When you introduce a rule.
Public good with rule or?
Yes, not the public good, but the
rule following
the only
task.
Rule following task, great. And this and the public good games created equal amounts of cooperation. Was that correct? More or less.
Yeah, it's similar. Yes, a bit higher, I think, with cooperation, but unfortunately, I cannot look it up because yes.
And I was thinking that perhaps maybe the PGG itself, its instructions, do somehow create a rule that hey, give others, or like.
Okay. It's like I think that's a very good question. Here, for experimental purposes only, we have used things like explicit rules. In reality, rules don't have to be written or explicit. Take the queuing example, certainly in the UK. When you see a queue, that doesn't say for a bus, or the bus or somewhere. It doesn't say the rule is to go to the end of the queue. It doesn't say that. Everybody can infer it. Yeah? So many social situations, you know from experience or socialization or whatever, what the rule is. Yeah? You can infer it. So that's it can therefore be the case that people think, when you describe the game to them, even though it doesn't say you should contribute, they do, because they infer that's the right thing to do. So why I also believe that is another work prior to CRISP, we elicit people's moral judgments about cooperation and not cooperating, how morally how morally good is to contribute to the public good or not to contribute, and it follows. It's not, the results are very intuitive. Not to contribute, free ride, is morally bad. To contribute is morally very good, and to do something intermediate is something intermediate, in terms of moral judgment. So now that's what our subjects tell us. If they think like that when they see the game, they might say, okay, to contribute is obviously the morally right thing to do because all of us benefit. And therefore, I implicitly infer a rule. That's what I should do. Yeah? And I do it for that reason. Yeah? Some people may be less, but of course, it's now ambiguous. It's not clear. But many social situations might have that implicit element because people look at the situation. Maybe, that's why I think it's interesting now. How do people perceive situations is something that is completely understudied, at least for economists. For psychologists, it's a bit different. How do I, when we introduce experimental games to people, we assume that people understand what we understand, which is probably a heroic assumption. But one thing, what we can say is that people understand the incentive structure, but they don't look at this only in terms of incentive. They look at this because of social preferences or because of moral reasoning, and they infer a rule, because it's obviously what it would be best for all of us to contribute everything here, and therefore, that's the morally best thing to do, and therefore I think I should do that. So it's moral reasoning, and then they come social preferences. This might be so how all of these things are related is completely open. Yeah, but incentives matter too. Yeah, it's not that incentives don't matter. If you manipulate incentive structure, so you're making cooperating less attractive relative to free riding, for instance. We've done some prisoner's dilemma experiments where you see this very beautifully. Yeah? If you make the temptation payoff bigger in the prisoner's dilemma, keeping everything else constant, cooperation rates plummet. Yeah? So incentives matter, what other people do matters, morality matters. It's a very rich situation. Therefore, to me, the interesting productive thing is to study how they are related using a relatively restricted lens of motivations rather than this, that, and the other. So